Okay, so first of all, an apology. Short of me doing a very, very late one tonight, I can't see the chances of me getting this video out today. I'm basically starting about 5 hours later than usual, thanks to a neighbour having work done on their roof right next door. So I'm hoping to make this the final part of my review of the interview with flatmate Nathalie, because to be honest, it is so mentally exhausting listening to her because of the way that she is constantly backtracking, contradicting herself, lying. And yes, I am normally very reluctant to accuse someone of lying, but we've now listened to most of her interview, and it's been pretty damn clear that she has lied at points in the interview, because she'll say one thing and then she'll say the opposite. Well, one of those things has got to be a lie. Now, I don't know what her family situation is, but I do believe, given how many times she's spoken about prioritising herself and her son, that that is in fact the reason why she's been so evasive in this interview. I don't know if it is a fear of losing custody or a fear of CPS involvement, but I certainly feel that that is the reason why she's prepared to lie and not speak up for Maddie. Are they likely to call her up as a witness? Well, that's interesting because she has given some really important information in here amongst all the BS. But at the same time, she hasn't proven to be credible. She keeps changing her story. She keeps being extremely evasive. So she could actually prove to be a problematic witness for the prosecution. She could, however, prove to be a useful witness for the defence because of her insistence on having not seen or heard anything. And that could be something that the defence chooses to use to their advantage. Now, obviously, while we have seen the list of depositions and her name's not on there, that doesn't mean that she can't be deposed. And given how evasive she was in terms of them catching up with her to do this interview, it's also quite possible that they're still trying to basically pin her down in order to get her in for a deposition in the first place. Of course, it's always possible that with the amount of time that has now passed, she may be more inclined to be honest with law enforcement. So I guess there is the potential for her still being a useful witness. Although, how often do you see in trials when a witness is brought forward and the defence pulls out their statements or their interviews from when the case first occurred and points out that they are lying and basically completely discredits the witness? So it will be very, very interesting to see what happens in terms of her being used as a witness for this case. Okay, I think I've definitely yabbered on enough, and I do want to just get through this interview so we can move on to the second interview with Nathalie and then start going over a few other interviews, because otherwise at this rate we'll be up to the trial and won't have gotten back over some of the really important interviews that I would very much like to look at before the trial.
Did you see, other than I keep going back to Monday morning, and so when you were getting ready for your day, you didn't see or hear anybody. Do you remember what time you woke up?
At like 6:45. My son wakes up by 6:30. He's already in the shower by the time I wake up.
Have you talked to your son about this?
Very much, it's very light. My son's on the spectrum, so he takes things in very quickly, and like, not that he forgets about it, but he like compartmentalizes it and like keeps it moving. He's well aware, but the emotion side of it is a little bit disconnected, just because that's the way he kind of that's the way he kind of is. But
What do you think he would have went downstairs at any point before you did?
no.
No. Okay.
Okay, can we be real here? It seems extremely unlikely that Stefan would have taken Maddie out to the Lincoln much earlier than around 7:30. He may be a bit of a psychopath. Sure, he drove around all morning with her in the passenger seat, but that would be really, really risky to take her out and just leave her in the car before he was actually ready to go. So when she says that she woke up at 6:45 and her son's awake by 6:30, and she claims that she never heard anything, I swear all the people in this house are deaf and blind. And once again, Detective Morris asks a question, doesn't get an answer, and doesn't follow up on it. He's asked her if she spoke to her son. Now, I will admit his questions are a little bit too general. Would have been better to say, did you speak to your son about what happened to Maddie? Or did you speak to your son and ask him if he heard anything on the Monday morning? Because it's a very open question to say, did you speak to your son? It's not going to get the answer you want. You're going to have to clarify, even if you do get an answer. But she didn't give him the answer. Instead of actually saying yes or no, she pulled the autism card. And yes, I understand what she's saying about him compartmentalising things, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't observed things. That doesn't mean that he didn't know what was going on. So, I mean, the way she's saying that sort of implies that she didn't speak to him. But we haven't had a direct answer from her with regards to this. And I hate saying this, but it feels like she is intentionally using her son's autism as a shield, as a way of avoiding the more difficult questions, as a way of deterring the detective from following a particular line of questions. And of course, to the best of my knowledge, I cannot recall if it's ever been mentioned, like if he is non-verbal, if he is high functioning, any of that stuff. Because you can be on the autism spectrum and be extremely high functioning, but no one's asked her this. She's just used it as a shield, and no one's tried to actually try and clarify where things truly are at with her son.
What kind of sleeper is he? Is he
Deep. Knocks out. Always been a good sleeper.
alright?
Of course he's going to be a deep sleeper who knocks out. It seems like every single person in that townhouse was a Rip Van Winkle. Honestly, it almost seems like you could just rock up there in the middle of the night, throw a massive party, and no one would know about it.
So you wake up 6:45, you do your morning routine. Did you fix lunches and stuff like that day? Okay, and you didn't see anybody.
No.
So when you fix lunches, is that right before you guys walk out the door, or okay? So if you're leaving at 7:45, so 7:15, 7:30 fixing lunches, or
No, like 7:35 to 7:40. I'm downstairs. There's a quick sandwich. Everything else is like packaged. So I just grab everything, put it in there, go upstairs, get them out the door by 7:45.
okay?
So it's all within 10 minutes, pretty much.
Okay, I can imagine that if you are super organised, then probably 5 minutes to chuck together a couple of sandwiches, grab a bunch of prepackaged stuff and shove them into lunch boxes or whatever you carry your lunch in is doable. So she's down in the kitchen between 7:35 and 7:40. So let's just pause there and have a look at some of the things that Jenn has said. Now, according to her story of Stefan going in and putting the dog on the lead, after he woke her up and told her to go back to sleep, she apparently did hear someone in the kitchen. Although she said it sounded like they were opening and closing cupboards, like they might have been looking for something or something like that. We also have her talking about when she's having that little psychic moment with Detective O'Malley, and he asks her how she thinks Stefan got Maddie out of the house. She says, well, I think he carried her out, but something along the lines of how did he do it, because we don't know the flatmates' schedules. They come and go at all hours. And then she comes up with, if he took Maddie out at 7:30, something along the lines of, oh, he's lucky he didn't get seen by a flatmate or caught out by a flatmate or something like that. It was a curious comment to make. Here's the thing. when I finished my undergraduate university degree, I took a few years off before going on to do my postgraduate degree, because while I'd been working on my undergraduate degree, the job that I'd been doing wound up being a situation where I was working in the food service industry, managing two separate businesses. So I wasn't in a hurry to go on and do my postgraduate degree, because I was quite satisfied with where things were at for me at that point in time. I was sharing a villa unit, which is, just a fancy word for, it pretty much looks like a house and you just have a few of them on the one block. I was sharing a villa unit with my sister, and she was working full-time during the day. And I would always, even though I would be getting to bed extremely late every night, I would always wake up while she was getting ready for work. Just be aware of her getting ready for work. It was just sort of, I guess it's an ADHD thing. And then the moment she would head out the door, pretty much once I heard the car start, I'd be back asleep. So why am I bringing that up now? I always thought that Jenn talking about hearing someone in the kitchen, if she's being truthful about going back to sleep after being interrupted by Stefan, then I always thought that that must have happened almost immediately after Stefan had woken her up, because otherwise she would have drifted back off to sleep and not heard anything. I had speculated that maybe the dog had been tied up in the kitchen somewhere or tied up in Maddie's room, but that doesn't make sense because Nathalie would have been aware of it when she came downstairs. I actually believe that Stefan may have shut the dog in with Jenn just to get Maddie out of the house. Or even if he tied it up for long enough to get Maddie out of the house and then let it loose again. But my point is this. Jenn makes this point to the detective about it essentially being a close call, and that essentially had Stefan been any later, he could have been seen by a flatmate. Did Nathalie come downstairs just after Stefan had gone out the door with Maddie? She says she goes downstairs around 7:35. He was at the dumpster around 7:30. That could be a close call. But it certainly makes me question how she possibly could have heard nothing. And of course also makes me question if her son did hear something. Now, supposedly, she leaves the television on not all night, blaring super loudly. And I've expressed my doubts about that, simply because people with autism spectrum disorder are ultra sensitive to any kind of sensory overload, noise especially. So I just cannot see him coping with being in a room trying to sleep with a super loud television going on. But let's say that does happen. Let's go to the morning. You are on a deadline, essentially. You have a meeting first thing, so you need to be out the door by 7:45 at the latest, because you've got to drop your son off at your parents' place. So there's no time to be wasted. Are you going to leave the television on while you're getting ready, so that there is potentially a distraction there for your 12-year-old son, so that he could, while you're having a shower, while you're making lunches, forget that he's meant to be getting ready and become distracted by the television? She's claims to be Mother of the Year, essentially. So it seems highly unlikely to me. So explain to me how she didn't hear Stefan taking Maddie downstairs. And is it possible that her son heard something? It seems highly likely.
Okay. And you didn't see Stephen or Maddie at that point. Could you hear if any tussling around, if Maddie was getting ready for school, or if Stephen was getting ready to take Maddie to school or anything like that? Would you have heard it?
I mean, I was like, every time I saw Maddie, I would address her. I would say, "Good morning, babe. Good. How you doing? Like, you okay?" Like, if I would have seen Maddie, I would have addressed her. So yes.
Okay, let's just backtrack to the beginning of this interview for just one moment. Nathalie explained that essentially her job is one of liaising with people. She spends a lot of her day travelling around and talking with people with regards to the roofing and construction business where she works. That means that she needs to be a good listener. She knows how to actively listen to people and answer their questions appropriately. Otherwise, she still wouldn't be doing that job, right? But here we get, he asks her if he saw Stefan or Maddie that morning, and she says no. So that question's dealt with, that's out of the way. And then he says, could you hear maybe tussling around, or if Maddie was getting ready for school, if Stefan was getting ready to take Maddie to school, or anything like that, would you have heard it? Essentially, did you hear anything that morning? What does she answer with? Again, we get the word jumble first. I mean, I was there, like, and then she goes into, every time I saw Maddie, I would address her. If I would have seen Maddie, I would have addressed her. We weren't asking at that point in time about if you had seen Maddie or if you had actually spoken to Maddie. That wasn't the question. The question was, did you hear Maddie or Stefan? And she has, quite expertly, once again, stepped around the question and given an answer that actually doesn't match the question. This from someone who, like I said, as a living, should be more than capable of comprehending questions and giving appropriate answers.
100%.
Okay, so the times that you've heard Maddie maybe waking up or anything like that, is it noisy?
When the only reason like I see is because I see her coming out.
And swing and miss. So he's tried again to tackle the "Did you hear Maddie?" question. But he's tried the attempt that worked previously by basically asking her a question which presumes that the discussion is about something that is known to her. So he says, when you've heard Maddie, those times when you've heard Maddie of a morning, is it noisy? So after asking her if he had heard Maddie or Stefan, he's now trying to basically get her to answer essentially that she's heard Maddie of a morning normally. And in doing that, he's basically straight out saying, when you've heard Maddie. So not repeating, not asking, do you normally hear Maddie of a morning, or not repeating the question of, did you hear Maddie? But he's asking it in a way that should trick her into giving an answer with regards to hearing Maddie. It's that whole thing of trying to trick the other person's brain into believing that that fact is already established. So here, he's trying to trick her brain into thinking that the fact is already established that she would normally hear Maddie, even though she has not given that answer. Because if you can do that with someone, quite often that's when they slip up and they give you the answer you want. Because by the time their brain processes the fact, oh, hang on, I was actually never asked that question anyway, the answer's already out. But it didn't work. So she goes back to talking about when she sees Maddie. So she's like, and it sounds like she's going to say see, the only reason I see is because I see her coming out. So she's completely nixed the question with regards to hearing Maddie. She's not going to answer that question for him. Apparently that topic is off limits.
So, but Monday morning, dead silence, or?
I didn't see her at all.
Okay. Dogs barking, cat meowing, anything?
No, at that time, Sailor is not barking. The cat is still typically in Jen's room.
Mm-hmm.
And strike 3. But Monday morning, was there dead silence? And she says, I didn't see her at all. Okay, well, dogs barking, cat meowing, anything? Essentially, did you hear anything? And her answer is, no, at that time Sailor's not barking and the cat's still typically in Jen's room. He's now asked her 4 times if she heard anything on the Monday morning, and she's avoided it every time. The closest she's come is latching onto his question about Sailor and the cat and answering that question, even though that was one of those facetious questions basically along the lines of, was there absolute silence in the townhouse? What about the dog? What about the cat? He didn't really want an answer about the dog or cat. He wanted a simple answer of, did you hear anything? And each time she has avoided answering. She's basically said, no, I didn't see Maddie. I didn't see Stefan. Typically, the cat's in Jenn's room. And no, at that time, the dog's not barking. I think she meant in general, at that time of day, the dog's not barking. She is flat out refusing to give him an answer here. To me, this would be the point in the interview when I would rather diplomatically point out to her that the whole point of this interview is to get justice for that little girl that she's known since she was a baby. To make sure that Stefan Stearns can be locked up and never get out. Because she's doing nothing here for Maddie. Her number one goal here is to protect herself and her son. Well, guess what? Your son is still alive. Your son has not been injured by Stefan Stearns. You are still alive. You've not been injured by Stefan Stearns. You will, over time, heal and move on with your life. 10, 15 years down the track, you'll be telling people about this little girl that you knew called Maddie. And Maddie will still be gone. But your selfish ass couldn't even be honest in this interview. Couldn't even speak up and tell the truth for Maddie. Just like so many of the other adults around Maddie. You basically turned and looked the other way. And then after Maddie was gone, you still chose not to stand up for her. Honestly, excuse my rant, but I cannot believe that I tried to give this woman the benefit of the doubt. That I tried to be kind about her. Because right now, to me, she seems almost as bad as Jenn. And I can't help wondering just how much she knew and just how much she saw. Because she has lied throughout this interview. She has spoken in circles. She has deliberately avoided answering questions. She's done everything she can in this interview to avoid cooperating and helping this investigation, which the whole goal of which is to get justice for Maddie. Now, I will give her this. She does sound as if she did genuinely care for Maddie. But I'm also going to say this. And I hope that it is eating her up inside that she didn't do the right thing by Maddie. And that she didn't even speak up in this interview and tell the truth for Maddie's sake. He is clearly extremely exacerbated at that point. Just hearing him basically letting off steam, he even sounded like a steam train letting off steam. And I can understand. I think my head would have been exploding at this point in time, were I in an interview room trying to interview her. But surely by this point in the interview, he can tell that his approach is not working and that he needs to come at it a different way. And I realise he's not interviewing a suspect. He's not even interviewing a witness, or, not a direct witness. But she is still important in this case. But they have potentially screwed up the handling of someone who could actually prove to be a key witness in the trial against the scumbag.
Do you think Maddie was home when you left?
There had been days where like she had slept over her grandma's house, but to be honest with you, I didn't think she was home.
Now that's an interesting one. He's asking her if he thought Maddie was home when she left. And there's no hesitancy. She doesn't say like once. There's no stopping and starting. So she says there've been days when she slept over at her grandmother's house. So to be honest with you, I didn't think she was home. And that all came out quite smoothly. But when I hear someone, first of all, overdoing their answer, did you think Maddie was home when you left? No, I don't recall seeing or hearing her, so I didn't think she was home. But no, she has to explain how Maddie slept over at Yolanda's at some times. And then this is when you get the persuasive language thrown in. To be honest with you, when I hear someone in these sort of situations come out with, to be honest with you, it is a red flag to me. It could just mean, this time I'm being honest with you. All the other stuff I've said is just utter bullshit. But a lot of the time, if someone has to emphasise their answer by starting with, to be honest with you, it makes me question if they are in fact being honest. And here's the thing. She was home when Maddie got home. Maddie got home at 8:30. Now let's say that maybe Stephanie wanted to get her daughter home, so she didn't stop in and say hello to Nathalie. She just dropped Maddie off, hopefully watched her head in the front door and drove away. So let's just presume that Stephanie didn't go in the house and say hello to Nathalie. But we've heard Angelica mention, you can hear that front door open and close. You can hear when people come and go from that townhouse. Even if Nathalie had her television blaring, as she claims, and like I said, I find that very doubtful, but the sound of a door opening and closing is one of those sounds that does tend to carry. Not only that, supposedly Maddie came home and took a shower. Wouldn't you also hear the sound of the shower running? Would you really have your television that incredibly loud that you wouldn't be able to hear the environment around you, particularly if, as she claims, or at least implies, particularly if you have your own history of PTSD. You're in a townhouse alone with a child at night time. Are you going to have the television so loud that you can't hear if anything's going on around you? Or are you going to make sure, because you do have a trauma background, that you are able to hear what's going on around you? Because if you do suffer from PTSD, then you are pretty much in a permanent state of fight or flight. Or at least you are poised to go immediately into fight or flight. So apparently, even though she knew Jenn was working late, supposedly, because she claims that they'd been talking about Jenn's job because it was something positive to talk about. But apparently, she never heard Maddie coming into the house when she was dropped off after her party, even though there would have been no other sound in the house, because Angelica didn't get home till 11:30. So she didn't hear Maddie arrive at 8:30. She didn't hear the shower running. And apparently Maddie used to shower for an hour. And she didn't hear Stefan arrive at 8:45. She didn't hear the door open again and close, or the sound of someone walking up the stairs, because I would imagine that, like most people, the first thing he would have done when he arrived was probably to take his stuff upstairs and put it in his room. Given that, presumably at that point in time, Maddie would have still been in the shower. Even if he had said hello to Maddie first and then taken his stuff upstairs, well, it still was early in the evening. You're going to tell me that she didn't hear him going up the stairs? See, here's where it would have been a good time to ask her, do you recall what time Angelica got home on the Sunday night? Because remember, Angelica's room was right next to hers. And it would have been interesting to hear her come up with an answer. Did she wake up when Angelica came home and heard her? Or did she also not hear Angelica come home? It's funny how Jenn claimed that the flatmates hadn't heard anything, but then asked, did they hear anything? As if she had to check and make sure that nobody had actually told the detectives that they had heard something. Even if there was no sign of Maddie being around on the Monday morning, I just find it really, really hard to believe that she wouldn't have heard any noises on the Sunday night, especially early on in the night, when presumably she was still awake, and Maddie got home. And then 15 minutes later, Stefan arrived. It just really doesn't seem logical to me.
Have you ever known Maddie to say, hey, I want to go to school early?
Mm-mm.
No. Have you ever known Maddie to like fast food at all?
Fast food? Starbucks. Like if we ever went to McDonald's, we'd get some nuggets or McFlurries. I mean, it wouldn't be something like she would take. Like I have never seen her not be okay with fast food. Like it,
Kind of. Just like any kind of kid.
right?
So I think we can be pretty confident that Jenn did not share the official narrative with Nathalie, because it's the second time when Detective Morris has asked her a question which essentially implicates Jenn as well, but she's been happy enough to answer it, which to me says that she didn't know what sort of answer Jenn had given. Have you ever known Maddie to say, hey, I want to go to school early? And you get this, well, I can't even make the noise. But the no sound, and he's like, no. And the way she was responding there sounded very much like the response of someone who was answering the question knowing that somebody had lied about that. It kind of feels a bit like a kind of a gotcha moment, but in this instance it's not about her being caught out, but it's the same sort of response as, well, when you and your brother went and got those chocolates out of the fridge and ate them, did your brother get permission from an adult first before he got them out for you guys to eat? It's that sort of reaction that, no. Where you're essentially not involved, but you know that your answer is going to incriminate someone. That's why it sounded to me. And let's be real, that story was all over the news. And Jenn probably said that same story to the police officers when they were at the townhouse and Nathalie was sitting behind her. So I can see why we get that sort of response. And then we get the question about fast food. Have you ever seen her not want fast food? And essentially what she's saying here is, heck no. I've never known her to not want fast food. She's basically saying, it's not like Maddie lives on fast food, but given the option, she's not going to turn it down. Although, that's kind of a moot point anyway, because Maddie was already deceased when she was taken out of the apartment. So the Macca's story is just one big load of BS anyway. So there's no need to prove that Stefan lied about her sleeping and not wanting Macca's, because that whole part of the story was completely made up. But still, it was worth asking.
Right, like it was it constant? No, I think that because we were always like downstairs cooking and stuff. I would think that Jenn was cooking for her and stuff, but I mean, I think if she consumed fast food, it was fairly normal. It wasn't like out of the ordinary.
Now that was actually rather enlightening, wasn't it? He's asking her about the fast food thing, and she's continuing on here saying, it wasn't a constant thing. We were always downstairs cooking and stuff. I would think that Jenn was cooking for her and stuff. I would think that Jenn was cooking for her. Meaning that she's got no idea what was happening in terms of meals for Maddie. Remember, she said that it's pretty much normal for her and her son to stay and have dinner with her parents. And she gets home later on. So, for all we know, Maddie could have been living on pizza pockets. Yes, that was a deliberate Summer Wells reference there, because it just brings to mind Candace and her just basically feeding the kids on pizza pockets all the time. I mean, Jenn didn't know how to cook the dishes that Maddie liked, and she talks about coming home that Sunday night and having a pub sub waiting for her. And it does make me think, did she ever prepare a decent meal for Maddie? Or was it just something like pizza pockets straight out of the freezer, chucked in the oven, here you go, here's your dinner? Or takeout. And is that why Maddie often spent weekends at Yolanda's place? Because Yolanda recognised that Jenn wasn't cooking decent meals for Maddie, and at least wanted to make sure that on the weekends Maddie got a few decent meals. Because I honestly cannot see Jenn as being the sort of person who would bother to put the effort in to cook a proper meal. I can see her being a Candace Bly kind of person.
Have you ever heard Jenn tell Maddie or anything like that she wanted Maddie to go sleep somewhere else so Jenn could get a good night's sleep?
No. If Maddie was sleeping somewhere else, it's because either Jenn had to work late or she was just sleeping over grandma's house. But I've never... No.
So it definitely seems that the best way of actually getting an answer out of her is to ask it in an indirect fashion. If you remember, earlier in the interview, he asked her where Maddie slept. And she was talking in circles, she was contradicting herself. She was essentially trying to say that Maddie always slept in her fake room. And then she changed that around a bit to Maddie probably slept with Jenn after Stefan moved out, because Jenn doesn't like to sleep alone. So she already contradicted herself there after saying that, as far as she knew, Maddie always slept in her fake room. And now, because he's asked her essentially, have you ever heard Jenn ask Maddie to sleep somewhere else so she could get a good night's sleep? Obviously, what is being said there is about Jenn's bed, because if Maddie was sleeping in her fake room, it's not going to affect whether or not Jenn gets a good night's sleep. But Nathalie's forgotten here about the bit where Maddie supposedly slept in her fake room. You can hear her trying to process what's being asked here, trying to figure out what the catch is, because you get this long no, and then she repeats no twice. So like no, no, no. If Maddie was sleeping somewhere else, it was either Jenn had to work late or she was sleeping over at her grandma's house. She probably should have stopped there, because she started saying, but I've never, and then no. I've never what? I've never known her to go upstairs and sleep with Stefan? Because she stopped herself from saying something there and instead replaced it with no. Did she know that Jenn was sending Maddie upstairs to sleep in that room with Stefan? Maybe by the time she became aware of that, having already been rebuffed by Jenn for questioning Maddie being in that room playing games, maybe she chose at that point just to stay quiet.
Have you ever known Maddie to sleep with Jenn and Stefan in the same bed?
I've never known about that. I have had so many thoughts in my head since everything happened. I don't want to confuse what I felt before with what I feel now. But no, in my head, the way this went was that somebody was sleeping on the couch before they opened the partition area. They opened the partition area so that Maddie can sleep there. That's how things went in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's start with this. You can suspect something is happening. You can believe that something is happening without necessarily knowing that it is happening. What am I talking about? He asks her about Jenn and Stefan sleeping in the same bed with Maddie. And she starts out with, I've never known about that. Which would have been a good place to stop. It would have prevented suspicion. But then she goes on, I've had so many thoughts in my head since everything happened. I don't want to confuse what I felt before with what I feel now. So the way I take that is that she probably is struggling to process things in her head. And she may not even be able to recognise at that point in time the things that she kind of knew but didn't know for certain. The things that she suspected. Now, I believe that she knew a heck of a lot more than what she's letting on in this interview. The question is, why is she being so evasive in this interview? Is it just about protecting her and her son? Or is it just because, this is only a week later and maybe just trying to process everything has just got it all muddled up in her head? Or could it also be an element of guilt. If she's feeling guilty because she did know things, she sensed things, or she saw things, then at that point in time, it may be easier to convince yourself that actually you didn't know those things, you didn't see those things, you didn't believe those things. Because trying to deal with the guilt and the sense of loss would be pretty overpowering. So I don't know if this is all just her trying to deceive the detective, but it could also be her, in a way, trying to deceive herself, trying to rewrite the story in her head so that she can cope with it. And maybe over time, she will have come to grips with it a bit more. But I do believe that she knew stuff. I don't think Jenn would have told her what was going on, but I find it hard to believe that these flatmates didn't know that Maddie was sharing a bed with Jenn and Stefan. It's a small house. And we know that Maddie seemed to not understand that it was inappropriate because she made that comment to Jenn, not Jenn, to Deb, about it being amusing when she woke up with her leg over Stefan or something like that. So are you going to tell me that Nathalie, who was much closer to Maddie than Deb was, are you going to tell me that Maddie never said anything like that to her? I find that unlikely. And then, especially what Nathalie says after saying, like in her head, she doesn't know if she's thinking stuff from before or after. She says, but no, like in my head, the way this went was that somebody was sleeping on the couch before they opened the petition area. They opened the petition area so that Maddie could sleep there. Like, that's how things went in my head. That's an odd way of putting it. I would expect to hear something like, no, it was my understanding, or I thought this is how it was. But when I hear someone say, in my head, this is the way it went, it sounds more like someone telling a story. Talking about fiction. If you're talking about something that this is how it went in my head, generally the implication is this is how it went in my head, this is how I wanted it to be, but that's actually not what it was. And the thing is, she's saying that somebody was sleeping on the couch before they opened the petition area. To me, that sounds like an attempt to dodge around the truth. It's, again, the brain's way of basically preventing that lie from coming out in full. She couldn't say, in my head, Stefan was sleeping on the couch, because I suspect that that probably would have been a bit of a lie. So instead of saying that in her head, Stefan was sleeping on the couch. We go for the far more neutral. Somebody was sleeping on the couch. It's subtle, but it's still a way of being evasive. And then she talks about they opened the petition area so that Maddie could sleep there. And that's how things went in my head. So twice she said, this is how it went in my head. You know, she can't even commit to a concrete answer of this is how things were, this is what the arrangement was. No, it's this is how I saw it in my head. And then doubling down, this is how things went in my head. Like I said, that to me is essentially saying, this is how I'd like to believe it was. It's a very odd way of speaking. Now, let's go back to this someone sleeping on the couch. Because here's the thing. Now, I don't actually know when they got Sailor. We've heard the story, and that is that basically Sailor belonged to Stefan's aunt, who I believe was Chris's sister, and that at some point in time she developed Alzheimer's, couldn't look after Sailor, and Sailor ended up with Jenn. But we don't know when that occurred. So we don't know if that occurred before Maddie had her makeshift room or after Maddie had her makeshift room. Why does that matter? I don't think it matters hugely. But the point I want to make here is this. At the beginning of the interview, Nathalie mentioned that she couldn't recall seeing Sailor on the Monday morning. Normally, when she comes down, he is sleeping on the floor next to the sofa or on the sofa. That to me says that when she leaves of the morning, A, she must go past the sofa, and B, it must be clearly in her line of sight. So she's claiming here that the way things went in her head was that someone slept on the sofa, the couch, before they opened up the petition area. Now, that's the first we've heard of it in terms of from any people who've been interviewed. And according to Jenn, they all slept together from the get-go. Meaning that it appears that there was a period of time when all three of them were sleeping together in Jenn's room prior to Maddie having her own makeshift room. And since clearly Nathalie is aware of who's on the sofa or not on the sofa, she was able to notice that a dog was sleeping next to the sofa or on the sofa. It would be much easier to tell if a person was sleeping on the sofa. So she has to know that after Stefan moved in, the three of them were sharing a bed. Otherwise, where does she think Maddie was sleeping? She would know that Stefan wasn't sleeping on the sofa every night. It's not like Stefan was an early riser. So that one comment says to me that she did actually know that the three of them were sharing a bed. And hence the reason when she gives this description, she refers to it as that's how things went in her head, not how things actually went. And I'm wondering, since originally it was the three of them sharing a bed before Maddie got her makeshift room, what the motivation was for putting that room in, especially given that Maddie never slept in it. And I think when Nathalie was talking about that instance where she spoke to Jenn about Maddie being in Stefan's room with him, the way she spoke about that did give me the impression that there may have been previous attempts to say to Jenn that things were inappropriate. Is it possible that with Nathalie being someone who sounds like she could be outspoken at times, that when she first moved into the townhouse and observed Jenn, Stefan and Maddie were sharing a room, that she conveyed to Jenn that she felt it was inappropriate. And of course, with her being Stephanie's best friend, perhaps Jenn was a little bit fearful that Nathalie might mention it to Stephanie and it might get back to Jenn's family. And perhaps that's the reason why the fake room went in. But it certainly seems that timing-wise, there had to have been a period of time when Nathalie was living in that townhouse before Maddie got her fake room, when the three of them were sharing a bed. I mean, she was going past the couch of a morning, so she would know that someone wasn't sleeping in that couch. Where did she think that people were sleeping?
What is your gut telling you what happened?
It's very confusing, in the sense of like, because this man looked at me in my eyes with no, like acting like he didn't just do what he did. I feel very insecure. Just in general, the way I view people, I guess. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was type. I just feel really insecure about everything because it just makes me feel like anything I ever knew was not right. Like if this was really going on, like when we didn't see anything, like that's how I feel. I feel a lot of guilt. Like I feel like, man, were we just not paying attention? Like.
So he's asking her what her gut is telling her about what happened. And she's very confused. She again talks about the way he looked at her. And then she says she feels insecure because she didn't see it. Even though earlier on in the interview, the way she said things made it sound to me that she actually did believe he was capable of unaliving someone. And then she talks about questioning her judgment and having a lot of guilt. and says, were we just not paying attention? Now, this is kind of a natural reaction. In a situation like this, where you have a child who's been unalived, and you are someone who is close to that child, then trying to process what has happened or may have happened, there are things that you can't verbalise. If it truly is something that you know nothing about, then you're not going to say things like, I believe he drugged her or strangled her, because there wasn't any evidence or any mess. I believe he carried her down the stairs and took her body somewhere where there were woods and gators. That's not natural. That's not something that the brain can actually physically cope with if you are unaware of what has occurred. If all you know is that this child went missing and was found a number of days later under bamboo out the back of Whoop Whoop, that's all your brain is going to be able to register. And even just trying to say that out loud is going to be something that's really, really hard to do. So I would not expect her, even after a week, to be able to speculate on how Maddie died, how she was taken out of the townhouse, where she was taken to. Because her brain's just not ready to cope with any of that yet. So her reaction here is far more normal than the reaction we got from Jenn. She can't process it right now. I think, based on everything we've heard in this interview, I do believe that she knew a heck of a lot before Maddie was unalived. I do believe that she's feeling guilt, but I do believe here that she's been asked a question that mentally she can't answer. Her brain can't make the step to say or think what has happened to Maddie. So instead you get this jumbled mess of all these thoughts that are sort of closely connected but not. And I don't know if at this point in time she's trying to convince herself that she hadn't seen the signs, she didn't know anything, or whether she's saying this for the detective. This is the best she can do in terms of the question, what's your gut telling you about what happened? She is actually saying what her gut is telling her. And her gut is telling her that things were wrong and that she did see that things were wrong. But she's not verbalising that for one reason or other, whether it's because she doesn't want to admit it to herself or because she doesn't want to admit it to the detective.
Do you think Stephen had something to do with this?
What?
Do you think Stefan had anything to do with this?
Oh my God.
Taking the equation out, what you know now,
Right.
leading up to it.
Like, before before everything went down, dude, I would have never thought that this would happen. I would have never thought that he was capable of doing anything to her.
Do you think Jennifer had anything to do with this?
No, bro. No. It's impossible, bro. No.
Why do you say that?
Because we're not like that. Like, we're not, dude. Like, we love our kids. Oh, that would break my heart.
I'm not saying she did. I'm just asking.
I know, but no, I can't see her. I can't see her being okay with this. No. I can't see her being okay with this. I can't see her allowing this to happen.
Okay, so this is the point where I basically hit the brakes yesterday. It was getting late into the evening, I must admit, but I listened through it, and there's just so much to unpack here that my brain just went, nah, this, I thought this is definitely something that I need to look at fresh in the morning. So let's start from the beginning. He asks her, do you think Stephen had something to do with this? And she's like, what? And then he asks again, and this time says, do you think Stefan had anything to do with this? And you hear this sigh, and she goes, oh my gosh. She didn't say gosh, but I kind of think YouTube wouldn't like me saying that. Now, I was confused at first by her reaction. Him asking her, do you think Stephen had anything to do with this? And she's like, what? And then I realised that because he said Stephen, she's known Jenn for 20-something years, so she would know Stephen Young. So I wouldn't be surprised, because it did not fit. I was thinking, why the reaction to him asking her if Stefan had anything to do with it? Because this is what this whole interview has been about. So I was really, really confused. But then I re-listened to the audio, and I realised that he had said Stephen, not Stefan. Because to be quite honest, I've tuned out now the times when the detectives refer to him as Stephen, because it actually amuses me when they get his name wrong. But, she's been in Maddie's life since Maddie was born. She's been in Jenn's life since before Jenn married Stephen. So I think that when he asked her this, she did actually think that he was asking about Stephen Young and not Stefan. And that's why the what sounded like he had just asked her something completely absurd that she couldn't possibly have imagined. And then that sigh after he repeats the question and corrects himself to Stefan definitely sounded like a sigh of relief to me, and the oh my gosh kind of goes in with that. You could expect to have heard here, oh my gosh, I thought you meant Stephen Young. That's my interpretation of it. Let me know your interpretation of it. But certainly, it was really confusing to hear that reaction, the what, when, this is towards the end of a very long interview discussing Stefan Stearns, discussing the things he did to Maddie, etc. So it just seemed so out of place to hear it. But then when you realise that actually she knows Stephen Young, and while for us, Stefan and Stephen have possibly come a bit interchangeable when it comes to these interviews, unless of course they are specifically talking about Stephen Young. But for her to hear someone say Stephen, especially this far through the interview, she probably did think Stephen Young. So having got that out of the way, and with her doing the oh my god, you scared me kind of thing, and I've just slipped up and hopefully YouTube won't penalise me for saying that. And then he says in his somewhat backwards way, taking the equation out what you know now, as she responds with right. And I think that right is still her processing her relief. I think it's more about her still feeling relief that actually they weren't implying that Stefan Young had been involved. It was more, okay, I'm on board with you now, I get what you're saying, keep going. So essentially what he wants from her is to take everything that she knows after the fact out of the equation and just think about leading up to it. Did she think Stefan had anything to do with it? Now, I find it interesting that he's asked this at this point in the interview, because the whole point of the interview was essentially Stefan did have something to do with it. But this is only a lead-in question before the main question about Jenn. And what's really interesting is that at this point, we see a shift in her language, a shift in the way that she is relating directly to the detective. So previously it was more of the he's interviewing her, she's giving the answers, that there's that degree of professional separation, I guess you could say. But now she's become emotional and she's using a more familiar kind of speech. Now she's referring to him as dude. So she says, like, before everything went down, dude, I would have never thought that this would happen. Now, using dude here is a more informal way of speaking, a familiar way of speaking. But in this instance, it's not a familiarity that indicates we're friends, we're mates. It's more about I'm pulling you down to my level and I'm showing you that I now have lowered respect for you. This is not, hey, you're my friend kind of dude. This is I really don't like you kind of dude. I mean, when someone uses dude, there's so many ways you can interpret it. But in this instance, this is her basically signalling a change in the balance of power. The irony is, of course, that she's pretty much been controlling this interview the entire time, and not being honest, avoiding answers, etc. But now in her mind, he's just gone down in terms of her respect. Now he's dude. Now, she continues on, and she's really protesting here. After saying, you know, before everything went down, dude, I would have never thought that this would happen. And she keeps going, I would have never thought that he was capable of doing anything to her. And you get a long pause. She's over objecting once again. She's becoming emotional. And the thing is here, we know from the rest of this interview that she can't stand Stefan. She has no respect for Stefan. She doesn't like him. She thinks he's a loser because he doesn't work, he doesn't contribute to the household. So why suddenly become emotional when asked, do you think he had anything to do with this? Why protest so much? My thought is this, that is that right now this is the guilt kicking in, and this is her essentially having this emotional reaction. It's kind of like opening the floodgates. This may be the first time that she's really had a proper emotional reaction to it, and I think this reaction stems from guilt. Guilt that she suspected things, guilt that she saw things that she may have dismissed, and that because of that, in her mind, that contributed to Maddie being no longer there. Because, like I said, she has no respect for Stefan. She's already said earlier on in this interview, not directly but indirectly, she has essentially given herself away and indicated that actually she does believe Stefan to be capable of these things. So this reaction has got nothing to do with Stefan. Of course she thought he was capable of doing it. It shouldn't be something that causes this emotional flood. The only reason that I can see for this sudden emotional flood over, do you think Stefan did this, knowing that she hates the guy pretty much, knowing that she's clearly never had respect for him, the only reason I can see for her emotional response here and her really pushing the point is a sense of guilt. And I mean, let's be real. Essentially what he's saying here is take off the table everything you know after Maddie died and only look back on everything before Maddie died. Looking at that, do you believe that he's capable of what he did, essentially? She has to say no, because otherwise she would be admitting that she saw red flags, she saw things that are wrong. But I suspect that's eating her up. The guilt over sensing things, seeing things, as well as that sense of isolation of not being able to say to someone, you know what, I saw this coming. You know, when I look back on it now, I realise that I saw this coming and I should have done more. She's not at that point. right now. Right now, she's still at that point of wanting to deny, in her head, wanting to deny that there was anything there that was concerning. So, realistically, what she's doing here, she's not just trying to convince him, she's trying to convince herself. And then, of course, things get really interesting. This next question was the purpose of the question beforehand. He already had his answer with regards to if she thought Stefan was capable or had anything to do with it. He knew from the conversation throughout the interview, even though she was so evasive and contradicted herself. I mean, I have criticised this detective, and I still stand by that. I feel that he has been somewhat effective in several interviews, including this one. But at the same time, I recognise that he clearly has been doing his job for some time, and he would have to have understood the context behind what she was saying. I would imagine that he had to have realised from everything she said that actually she could believe Stefan as being capable of doing such a thing. So basically, the question about Stefan is a primer, getting ready to ask her the actual question, because it is such a confronting question to ask that you do need to kind of work into it. If he were to just ask it outright, then she would probably just completely shut down. So he's basically gone with the soft option first to introduce the topic of discussing Stefan. And instead of getting a somewhat cold, emotionless response, which is what you would expect, you get this emotional response, which of course stems, like I said, to her own inner turmoil. So now he gets to the main question. Do you think Jenn, or Jennifer, he says, had anything to do with this? And she has a meltdown. She has this major emotional meltdown, and this becomes a very, very protracted objection. So still with the bro and the dude, so we get no bro, really quietly, no, it's impossible bro, no. She's really protesting here. She's having this major emotional reaction to this. And this is not what I would expect in terms of someone's reaction to hearing someone that they care about being accused of something so horrible. Right here, I would actually expect to hear some indignation, some anger, even some disgust. How can you even accuse her of something like that? How dare you? Why would you think she would do something like that? I would expect that sort of reaction. But instead, she just becomes super, super emotional. and she's protesting hugely. So why did she react like this? Basically, he has voiced, this is my opinion of course, he has voiced a question that she's been going through subconsciously in her mind. This emotional reaction says to me that actually Jenn and Stefan didn't confide in her on that Monday night when they were all hanging out in the townhouse, and that Jenn has almost certainly deceived Nathalie with regards to Jenn's involvement, her knowledge, anything to do with what truly happened to Maddie. I had been speculating that the flatmates were in on it, but I think basically the limit of their knowledge is from what they heard, what they saw, gut feelings, those sort of things, and that Jenn certainly never communicated anything to them with regards to what Stefan had done. So her reaction here is basically he's tapped into her deepest fear. The way she's reacting here tells me that she knows things, she's perhaps observed things, heard things. Her gut instinct has had her asking this exact same question of herself. And she has not acknowledged to herself this possibility. Essentially, her reaction here is the reaction of someone who is being told the very thing that they strongly suspected and feared. I mean, if someone asks you if you thought a person is capable of doing a particular thing that you know that not in a million years they would be capable of, you're not going to have this kind of emotional reaction. You're going to laugh it off, or you're going to become angry. You're not going to start having an emotional meltdown. And of course, I mean, as crappy as he is sometimes in terms of doing interviews, clearly this detective has a lifetime worth of experience and knows those moments when things have shifted. He knows what's going on here. He would recognise her reaction. He's probably spoken to countless families where he's had to go and confirm their worst fears. And he's seen this reaction from people. You know, this is the reaction that should have come from Jenn when she was being shown those photos of Maddie. But she was cold about it. There was no shock because she wasn't debating it in her head. She knew Stefan was doing those things. So it wasn't that unspoken question, that question that she was too scared to verbalise of, what if these things I'm seeing mean he's doing this? She knew the answer to it. She wasn't hiding it inside herself. Whereas Nathalie's reaction here says to me, this is something she has spent the last week going through in her head and trying to deny her suspicions. He knows this, so he doubles down. Why do you say that? And she becomes even more emotional. She says, because, and there's a long pause. And then she's talking about we, plural. We're not like that. We're not dude. Like, we love our kids. No, that would break my heart. So why the shift to suddenly talking about we, to including herself in this whole scenario? She's told us this earlier on. Basically, the bond between her and Jenn is it's a three-way bond. Her, Jenn and Stephanie have this bond about their kids. And in her mind, Jenn cared for Maddie as much as she cares for her own son. In her mind, Jenn is just like her. Her reality has been shattered. And because to her, in this little friendship huddle, her, Jenn and Stephanie are almost like one entity, in that they have this huge connection because they're children, because they're friendships. So to consider that one person in that entity could be capable of being involved or knowing about these things, there's this subconscious belief that this is the entire entity, that entire group, her, Stephanie and Jenn, who are being questioned here. Because, like I said, she sees Jenn as being just like her when it comes to Maddie, just like Stephanie. And she can't make that separation and admit to herself that everything she knew about Jenn was wrong. I mean, there could well be, deep down, this notion of, if Jenn can allow this to happen, what if something happens down the track and I allow this to happen to my own child? Now, I don't know if I'm stretching that a little bit far saying that, but definitely it is about that combined entity. We are all the same. You're questioning this, which means that if Jenn's capable of it, is it possible that you think that we are all capable of it? Based on her reaction, I would say this question about Jenn has really been weighing on her over the week since Maddie died. Now, the detective gives her this reassurance. I'm not saying she did, I'm just asking. And she acknowledges with, I know. But she still has to go on and continue trying to convince him or her or both. She's like, but no, I can't see her. She can't finish the sentence here. I can't see her being okay with this. There's a long pause and no. And she repeats it again. I can't see her being okay with this. I can't see her allowing this to happen. At this point in time, this is no longer about convincing the detective. This is about convincing herself. How do I know that? Because she's now using I statements. She's not telling him he's wrong. She's not saying Jenn would never do that. She's essentially saying she doesn't believe it. I can't see her being okay with this. That's about her. I can't visualize it. I can't see it. And then I can't see her allowing this to happen. Again, it's the I statements, and I can't see it occurring. She's trying to tell herself here that it's not a possibility, that she's wrong, that these thoughts that she's been having are wrong. If this was about convincing the detective, at this point, I would expect the topic of the sentences here to be Jenn. You don't understand what Jenn's like. Jenn's not like that. Jenn would never do that. But instead, it's all about, I can't see this. She's repeatedly protesting. She's being overly persuasive here. But in this instance, when you add in the emotion, when you add in the I statements, yes, she's trying to convince the detective that it's not a possibility. But this is a massive emotional reaction. This is her trying to convince herself that this thing that he's vocalised, that she's been trying to shut out for the past week, she's trying to convince herself that it couldn't possibly be true. That's why we are getting the emotion and the I statements and the repetition. Partly for him protesting this couldn't possibly be true, but the large part of what's going on here is for her. He's definitely touched on a nerve here, and she can't control her reaction because this is something that she clearly has been worrying about.
Have you seen any of the interviews on the news that Jennifer's done?
There was a snippet, and I literally came across it because it just appeared. I mean, I know Jenn. I know, at least what I know of Jenn is I know when she's nervous, right? I know when she's not okay. And what I saw there was someone that, and again, it's a snippet. I haven't seen all of them. I don't know how many she did. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I mean,
Okay, straight up, I'm going to say that she saw something in that snippet that she saw that was a red flag. So let me break it down. He asks her if she saw any of Jenn's interviews, and she's like, a snippet just appeared. And then you get the and you get a sigh. and she's really struggling to get the words out. I mean, I know Jenn, I know, and there's a sigh. At least, pause. What I know of Jenn is, like, honestly, get to the point already. And she says, I know when she's nervous, I know when she's not okay. Pause. And she can't finish what she's trying to say next. She starts saying, what I saw there was someone that, and then she pauses again. It's a snippet. I haven't seen all of them. I don't know how many she did. So she's trying to now steer away from what she was almost going to say. She can't say it. So instead, her brain's like, let's just insert this here. Let's just go off on a sidetrack for a moment. And then she still can't get it out. We get the and she says, I think that, pause, I mean, the I, and then you get a sigh. And to me, the sigh sounded like a sigh of defeat. A sigh of, I can't say the words. So she's not been able to explain or even say her observations of Jenn in that snippet of an interview. To me, that's really, really telling. She doesn't want to dump Jenn in it. She's seen something in that interview, and her brain is stopping her from admitting it to the detective, or maybe even stopping her from admitting it to herself. Either way, she's not going to explain what it was that she saw with relation to Jenn in that snippet of an interview that she saw. And just maybe that could be the cause of her meltdown when he asked her if she thought Jenn could have been involved or could have known about it.
I've spoken to her several times already. Sometimes when we're speaking, she seems a little disconnected. Is that normal?
So a lot of, and maybe this was my mistake, but a lot of the, if there's any type of like disconnection, I would say would be because of the medication. Like if I ever felt like she was just like not like a little bit out there, I would always atone it to like the medication that she was on.
Is that quite often, or very rare, or?
I thought she was doing really well recently. No, like in the most recent months, me speaking to her, she was very clear, very cohesive, like communicating back, being happy in a sense, like in a better mood. No, I mean, and again, seeing her now, I atone that to either maybe over medicating or being severely depressed, or like it's not her normal self. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if there's ever been time in the past where I felt like we were having conversation and she was kind of out there, I thought it would be because of the medication.
So he's realised that line of questioning basically just crashed and burned. So he goes at it from a different angle and asks her, he basically says, look, I've done a few interviews with her now and she seems a little disconnected. Is that normal? And again, you get this bumbling around, you get word salad, you get her taking forever to give an answer. She's basically putting it down to Jenn's medication, saying that essentially the times when she's been somewhat disconnected has been because of her medication. And she does acknowledge, oh, I thought she was doing really well recently. Here's the thing, earlier in the interview, she claimed that Jenn definitely was doing really well. So now that there's a question over Jenn being somewhat disconnected, she's going back to the medication, even though she's said essentially that the medication was balanced. But then her description of Jenn being disconnected, to me, doesn't quite gel with what we saw from Jenn. So she talks about her when her medications are right and she's not slightly out of it, she says that she's clear and starts saying cohesive, and she says communicating back, meaning that she can answer questions clearly and show that she can understand. Well, Jenn was doing that. So she's already essentially implied that when Jenn's out of it on her medications, she struggles to communicate clearly. Well, that wasn't the issue with Jenn in those interviews at all. The issue with Jenn was the disconnect between how she should have been acting and responding and how she actually was. So, essentially, Nathalie's description of Jenn being disconnected due to medications actually doesn't line up with what the detective is referring to. And then she fumbles around a lot more, and I think she's now referring to the interview that she saw, or certainly something in relation to while Maddie was missing, because she's basically saying that she's basically attributing Jenn's disconnect at the time with her over-medicating or being severely depressed. But she also doubles down and says that when Jenn's medication isn't right, that she's kind of out there, which to me means, acting kind of loopy, not quite making a lot of sense, not necessarily being cohesive or even clear with what she's saying. So, definitely, she's trying to say, yeah, the disconnect is meds, but then the description that she gives really doesn't match what the detective is talking about. There could be a little bit of truth in what she's saying here in terms of that she thought Jenn appeared over-medicated, but let's be real. If she was over-medicated, it wasn't over-medicated with her own prescribed medications. So essentially, Nathalie's tried to give Jenn a free pass here, and basically saying to the detective that, well, if she seemed disconnected, it had to have been because of her medications being out of whack. But then, when she gives her description of Jenn being disconnected, it's really not what the detective is talking about. It's really not what we have seen in the interviews.
Have you ever noticed any change in either Jenn's demeanor or Maddie's demeanor when Stefan moved out?
I would think that it was because of them actually being broken up and her having her space and not having him upstairs. Like, I do feel like it was a better mood, a better situation. Again, I saw her in like a better light, but
Did she seem happier, sad, angry?
I think there was moments where she felt lonely, maybe. After being with someone for so long, I can't imagine breaking up and stuff and then having to be alone. But I would say that. I would say feel lonely. But all in all, I want to say it was like a good move, like it was a good thing.
So, you may have noticed here that she doesn't specifically refer to Maddie. What she's talking about is in relation to Jenn. She does say that she thinks that Jenn may have felt a little bit alone. And she's saying that, you know, when a relationship ends, it's going to affect you. But let's be real. When Stefan moved out, him and Jenn had been broken up for 12 months. Now, she would have known that at least about the last 6 months of that, because of him moving upstairs. So it's interesting that she would say that she basically felt Jenn would have been affected by the relationship ending, because that was long over. But in terms of what she's saying here, while she does specifically mention it in relation to Jenn, she's kind of talking in general terms about the whole environment. It was a better mood, a better situation. And then all in all, it was a good move. It was a good thing. I would have asked for some specifics here because it's a very vague comment. But I find it interesting that she described it as being a better situation. Because remember, he asked her if she had observed a change in Jenn or Maddie. And here she's talking about it being a better situation, in that him being in the house was a negative thing, a negative situation. That's not referring directly to Jenn or Maddie. That's referring to actions, to events, to things that were happening in the house. Is she inadvertently saying here that basically him being gone meant that things weren't happening that had been happening before in relation to Maddie? Because essentially she's saying that when Stefan was there, something to do with his actions or his presence was causing a negative impact. She's not discussing interpersonal relationships, which is basically what you would expect when someone says, you know, was there a change in these people? She's basically referring to actions and their consequences. There were actions that occurred from Stefan that had consequences that negatively impacted on people. I'm not sure I'm explaining that too well. But basically, she has steered clear of saying anything to do with Maddie in terms of a change. And she's been very general and spoken in terms of the situation instead of the people.
Did Jennifer ever talk to you about her and Stefan's sex life at all?
No.
Did she ever talk to you about her sex life in general at all?
I mean, I know her like sexual orientation, right? But that's as far as like we talk in regards to that. I don't really honestly talk to my friends too much about that.
Makes sense.
Like super intimate, no. But we know each other's orientation and what we like.
Got it. Now, as for Jen, does she like boys or girls? Both?
Both.
Okay. Any idea about Stefan? Boys, girls, both?
I don't know.
No?
No.
Did Jen ever tell you that she's sexually active still?
No. If I would assume if she was, it would have been with Stefan. But I mean, we didn't talk about anybody new or anything like that. Like, as far as I know, she was on the Lonely Island. Like, we were all...
Has she ever told you that her sex drive is gone? Anything like that?
So I think at some point she had mentioned that as far as like part of like the symptoms.
When did she mention this to you?
During the time that she was having a difficult time with her medication, trying to find something out. But it was very like it was just one of the symptoms. Like, we didn't go into it because again, we didn't really, like, we don't go into like super sexual stuff.
Right.
I think it would be really fair to say, based on the rest of the interview, that basically, even if there had been discussions between them in relation to Jen's sex life and stuff like that, that there's no way she would have told this detective. So if she says, well, you know, I know Jen's orientation, but with regards to everything else, she basically says, you know, I know nothing. But the language that she's using around it makes me think that probably there have been discussions and she just doesn't want to share it. Because she says, I don't really honestly, and then she talks about, you know, we don't talk about it too much. And then she's talking about, you know, with her friends, we don't talk about super intimate stuff. And then again, we get the really comment. So she's using a lot of that sort of persuasive kind of language that implies that, yeah, it occurred, but not that much, really. So just those words like really, honestly, not super, as in not as much, you know, not too much. Didn't really, all those things are essentially saying, yeah, we discussed it. But that in her mind, what they discussed was probably somewhat insignificant. She's downplaying it while essentially trying to tell him that she didn't speak to Jenn about any of it. And let's be real, this is something that is highly subjective. So her saying, you know, we didn't really go into super sexual stuff, her idea of that could be very different from someone else's. I do think my takeaway here is that there probably were conversations that occurred between her and Jenn, and in her mind, that's where they stay. I would imagine that to her, whatever these conversations were that occurred were no one else's business. So if she's going to deflect, and there's no way she's going to give an answer, no matter how much she's pushed.
Is there anything that I need to know regarding this case that we haven't talked about today that you think?
No, if anything, I have questions. But
What questions do you have? Some may not be able to answer,
no,
but...
I don't. I've been so like with blinders on, and I told myself that once I moved out of that place that I could like accept new information.
Are you completely moved out? Like all your stuff gone?
Yeah. I'm supposed to help Angelica between 1 or 2 to move out the rest of her stuff.
Because I need to talk to her again today too. And I keep calling her, and maybe because I leave messages in English, and she doesn't really speak much English.
Right. She doesn't. Yeah. Yes, I'm completely moved out, and I feel like I want information, but then no, then I get scared and I don't want any information. No.
Now, this reaction from her when he asks her if she's got anything else to add, and she says, well, if anything, I've got questions. And she talks about having blinders on, and telling herself that she couldn't accept new information until she'd gotten out of that house. That's a perfectly normal reaction. And then to say, like, I feel like I want info and get scared and then I don't want it. That is such a normal reaction. You know, the brain can only take in so much at a time. And it would feel like being under a dark shadow, still having a connection to that house, knowing what happened. So it's about protecting your brain from too much stress at once. But at the same time, I think that shows where she's at with this, where she's saying that she feels like she wants the information, but she's scared and doesn't want to get the information. That to me says that she certainly did suspect a lot before Maddie went missing, and she doesn't want everything that she knows or fears confirmed. She doesn't want to hear things that are going to change her perception of her world. And, you know, it's self-preservation. But I do feel from listening to all this that is the context of what's being said here. She knows that there are some blows to come, and she's just trying to find herself the mental space to be able to cope with those blows before tackling the situation.
I mean, whatever you need to really get justice for her. I mean, to really close it, whatever.
That's my job.
I wish I would. Fuck. I don't know anything.
So, that's interesting. She says to him, you know, whatever you need to really get justice for her. So now she's distancing herself a little bit here and not saying Maddie's name. And I wonder if this is because this part of the conversation is basically after him asking her if Jenn could have been involved, him asking what she knew about the situation. So potentially, after spending an hour doing her best to distance herself from the situation, she's still in that distancing mindset, and so she can't say Maddie's name. It could also be that saying Maddie's name is a trigger, an emotional trigger, and that maybe she's just going to, you know, break down in tears if she says Maddie's name, because she's conveyed here that she has a lot of guilt. I mean, it could be a combination of both too. The you know, spending an hour trying to distance herself from the situation, but also carrying that guilt over, her things that she thinks she saw or things that she felt or something like that. And that, saying Maddie's name will just tip her further. I'd like to know your thoughts on that. But it does tick me off somewhat to hear her saying, whatever you need to really get justice for her, when she's just spent an hour talking in circles, being evasive, contradicting herself, outright lying, in order to basically protect herself and her son and not involve herself in the situation. How can you possibly claim now that you're going to give them whatever they need to get justice for Maddie, when you've basically blocked everything throughout the entire interview? And then she's really, really battling with something here. Something that I think part of her knows she needs to say it. Part of her knows this is when you should speak up. And she still can't. So again, whatever she was going to say, she can't get it out. She's like, I wish and there's like the F word on a long pause, and then very, very quietly she says, I don't know anything. Talk about fading facts. So she was battling with herself there. She wanted to speak up about something, but whatever it was, she couldn't do it.
I just want to make sure that 100%, because obviously when tips come in and mention you by name, I just want to make sure that you're being 100% honest with us. And even if you did, you're not going to get in trouble for not saying anything. It's just we need to know those type of details.
No, this was the only thing that I wanted to make sure.
Did you tell anybody about that message other than
only
the
Stephanie?
Okay.
And like I said, that was mainly just me. Like, I always felt like, okay, I'll be like the double lookout, make sure the kids are good, like have extra eyes on the kids. Like, this is a situation that I would have never wanted my kid to go through. Like, I get how severely this can affect you in life, and like, thank God that my situation was resolved. But like, I never wanted our kids to be this close to this shit. And I feel like I always prided myself to be more like, to have like that third eye, like to look out for danger type shit, to like be protective of our kids. And like, it's very upsetting that anything that happened. Like, it, like I said, I'm really insecure right now. Like, I don't feel like everything that I've known in my life, like I'm questioning.
So he goes back to talking about the tip and asks her, did you tell anybody? And she's like, only Stephanie. And like, that was, I said, so I think that she was trying to steer around it again. And I do think that she's probably discussed it with someone else outside of Maddie's family. And she's trying to steer clear of that for some reason. Maybe she's told that person more than just this one incident. And by admitting that she's told a particular person stuff, then she's admitting that she knew more as well. That seems to be the most likely scenario. But I want to take you back to the interview that Jenn did with Detective O'Malley. And she said to him, I've had a rule for the longest time about these sleepovers. And he points out to her, well, what made you have that rule? What prompted you to have that rule? Because it's not a rule that you're going to come up with unless there's a reason to do so, unless there is something that's happened that's made you think I need to make this rule. And this applies to what Nathalie is saying here. She's saying, I always felt like, okay, I'll be the double lookout and make sure the kids are good. And she didn't mean make sure the kids are good as in the kids are behaving, but make sure things are good as in nothing is going wrong. Because she then goes on to say, like, having extra eyes on the kids. I never would have wanted my kid to go through this. So she's very definitely here saying that when she moved into that townhouse, in her mind, part of what her role there was as a lookout for the kids, to make sure that they were safe. That is not something that just randomly comes out of the blue. You have to have a reason for feeling that you need to be super vigilant and that your role in that house is to keep a lookout for those kids. That to me says that she either didn't trust Jenn, or she didn't trust Stefan, or she didn't trust both. And I think if she's saying that she needed to be a lookout, to me, we know she didn't like Stefan. We know she didn't trust Stefan. But if she had to be a lookout, that says to me also that she didn't trust Jenn to really do the right thing by Maddie. She didn't trust Jenn to be vigilant enough, to be protective enough. Because otherwise, why would you feel the need to be that extra set of eyes over another person's child? I mean, I have a nephew and I have nieces, and I've never once felt the need to be an extra set of eyes over them, to make sure things were good with them. Because I have trusted their parents so fully, 100%. I've always known that my nephew and my nieces were safe, they were in good hands. I've always known that in their own homes, they were never at any risk. So I've never felt the need to be the extra set of eyes. And even with the two eldest, when their mother began a new relationship, I hadn't met the guy. I was living in a different state. But I trusted her so implicitly that I never felt any concern about her bringing a new person into the lives of my niece and nephew. So Nathalie saying this says to me that not only did she not consider the kids to be safe around Stearns, but she didn't trust Jenn to ensure that Maddie's safety was being looked after. And then she falls back on the mental health excuse that everybody in that household seems to use. She never wanted this stuff for the kids. She didn't want her son to have to go through this. She understands the impact of the mental health impact. And then she doubles down with she's feeling insecure and she's questioning everything that she's known in her life. And the original question is forgotten. Did you tell anyone else? So she's actually quite skillfully segued away from that question. She's said only Stephanie, but then she went down this huge rabbit hole after saying something that to me sounded like it could have been a suggestion that someone else had been told. She's gone down this huge rabbit hole completely in a different direction, finishing with offering up emotional vulnerability. Don't come at me, I'm vulnerable, I'm hurting, I'm questioning everything I've known in life, I'm feeling insecure. Let's change the topic. She's just done a really, really good job of sidestepping a question that she wanted to get away from.
Now, one quick question that you say you sleep with the TV on all night and it's loud or whatever. How do you hear your alarm?
I keep my phone like right next to me, and then my son wakes me up too.
I still don't buy this whole thing of leaving the television on really, really loud. It was a good question on his part, how do you hear your alarm? And she's, well, I keep my phone next to me. Well, that would make sense, even if you did have a really, really loud television and your phone was next to you, you would hear it. You're kind of tuned in to that sound. If you're anything like me, you're going to wake up 5 minutes before your alarm because you are dreading the intrusion of the alarm, so you wake up anyway. It's interesting that she says, and my son wakes me up. It's like she's doubling down on this is how I wake up. And the reason I say it's interesting that she's saying her son wakes her up, because remember she was saying that he gets up before 6:30, whereas she doesn't get up till around 6:45. So does he get up and keep a really close eye on the clock and wake her up? Because I have never known a 12-year-old to do that. I think, she's referring to she wakes up because of him moving around the room or going in the shower or something. But it's just a really odd thing to say, if you ask me, because either him moving around the room or getting out of bed would wake you up before 6:30, meaning wouldn't you just get up then? I don't know, maybe I'm just missing something here. But I honestly, with an autistic child, cannot imagine her keeping that television going blaring super loud all night. It would have been physically painful for her son.
All right. Can you think of anything else? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my cell phone number, okay? Mm-hmm. Feel free to call or text me anytime, day or night, if you can remember the slightest little detail that we did not talk about today. Mm-hmm. Would you mind please calling me or texting me and let me know, whatever that may be? Okay.
Okay, I know this was a really, really long video, but honestly, I think my brain would have exploded if I had to come back and do any more of this interview tomorrow, because she has been one of the most challenging people to listen to because of all the avoidance, all the changing topics, the contradictions, the outright lies, the talking in circles, all that stuff. Just, really, really hard to listen to. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to get it done with, get it over with, and then I can just forget about it. So I came into looking at this interview with the whole mindset of wanting to be kind to this flatmate, because I recognised that she wasn't responsible for Stefan's actions. She wasn't responsible for Jenn's actions. And she had been in this unfortunate situation of living in the place where all this happened. I didn't want to be unfair or unkind, especially given that at the time of the interview, this is a week after Maddie had died, I needed to keep in mind that there was definitely an element of trauma behind her responses in this interview. However, I realised that while everyone has essentially given her a free pass since this first interview first came out, that the reality is she doesn't deserve a free pass. I'm going to be blunt. She really does not deserve a free pass. She hasn't helped in this interview. She's been obstructive, in my opinion. She has avoided answering so many questions. She's contradicted herself. She's said things that were blatant lies. And at the base of the matter, she has basically put herself and her son above all else. And I understand parents protect their children, that's natural. But we're talking about justice for a 13-year-old girl who went through years of torture. A 13-year-old girl that nobody ever stepped in for to try and make a difference. A 13-year-old girl who deserves justice. But that's not important to her. Not when it comes to her and her child. And like I've said, yes, I could imagine that there is definite fear of perhaps losing custody or of having the attention of CPS brought on you because of the living situation that she was in. The crucial thing here is that she was no longer living in that situation. Presumably she was moving in with her parents at that point in time, meaning that anybody who were to come at her and say, well, you've had your son living in this kind of situation, now we need to reassess your suitability as a parent, the situation is gone. So they wouldn't have a leg to stand on. She sounds like a pretty smart person, and I would imagine that she would understand that. And if she was so concerned with regards to that sort of thing, then, I mean, your son goes to your parents' place every day. You have dinner there every day. Move in there till things blow over to ensure your son is in the right environment, to ensure that people can't come at you and question you as a parent. But don't turn your back on a 13-year-old girl who needs people to speak up for her so she can have justice. That to me is wrong. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think I've well and truly said my piece throughout these various videos looking at this interview. So I'm really interested to know your thoughts on this. So on that note, if you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. Thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.